The Texas sun was already brutal, at 9 in the morning, radiating off the asphalt driveway like an open oven door. The dashboard of the black SUV read 102 degrees. But my mother, Angela, didn't seem to notice the heat. She was too busy checking her reflection in the side mirror, adjusting her oversized sunglasses to make sure they sat perfectly on her nose. I stood by the rear bumper, watching my stepfather, Paul, load the last of the Louis Vuitton luggage into the trunk. The leather bags looked soft and expensive. Unlike the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, I was 12 years old, standing in the shadow of a 6,000 square foot estate that felt more like a fortress than a home. My mother finally turned her attention to me, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. They skimmed over my shoulder, as if looking at me directly might ruin her vacation vibe before it even started. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single, crisp, $50 bill. She held it out, not handing it to me, so much as letting it hover in the space between us, waiting for me to take it. "Here," she said, her voice light and airy, completely disconnected from the reality of what she was doing. "This should cover anything you need for the next 6 weeks." I took the bill. It felt thin and insignificant in my hand. $50. For 6 weeks. That was less than $1.20 a day. I opened my mouth to say something. Maybe to ask what I was supposed to eat, or what I should do if there was an emergency. But she cut me off before I could speak. "Don't be a burden, Abigail," she said, her tone sharpening just enough to draw blood. "You're 12. Figure it out." And with that, she climbed into the passenger seat and slammed the door. The sound echoed in the quiet morning air, final and absolute. Paul started the engine, the powerful hum of the air conditioning kicking in instantly inside the car, sealing them in a cool, comfortable bubble. I watched the taillights disappear down the long driveway, through the iron gates, and out onto the main road. I was alone. Alone in a massive, empty house with $50 and a summer heat wave that the news said was going to break records. Before I tell you what happened when the Texas power grid failed 5 days later, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The silence inside the house was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my ears the moment the front door clicked shut. Our house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, where I was the only exhibit that hadn't been put in storage. The air conditioning was humming, chilling the sweat on my neck. But the air felt stale, like it knew nobody was supposed to be breathing it for 45 days. I walked to the kitchen island. The marble was cold under my fingertips. There, sitting next to a bowl of wax fruit, was the emergency card Paul had mentioned. I picked it up. It was a Starbucks gift card, the corners worn and peeling. I flipped it over and called the number on the back, putting it on speaker. The automated voice was cheerful, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in my chest. "The balance remaining on your card is $4.12. I hung up. $4.12. Added to the $50 in my pocket. I had $54.12 to keep myself alive for more than 6 weeks. I walked to the pantry. Locked. A heavy padlock secured the handles. Something my mother had installed 2 months ago because she claimed I was snacking out of boredom and ruining my appetite for dinner. She hadn't unlocked it before she left. I stood there, staring at the brass lock, and I realized something that should have made me cry, but instead made my mind turn ice cold. My parents hadn't forgotten to leave me money or unlock the food. They hadn't just been careless. Carelessness is an accident. This was architecture. For years, I had wondered how they could treat me like this and still sleep at night. How could Angela look in the mirror and see a good mother standing in that empty kitchen? I finally understood the mechanism. It was a trap of normalized cruelty. They had to convince themselves that I wasn't a child. In their version of the story, I wasn't 12. I was a miniature adult. A survivor. A wise soul. They told themselves that leaving me with $50 wasn't neglect. It was a lesson in fiscal responsibility. It was a character-building exercise. If they admitted that I was just a frightened little girl who needed care, they would have to admit that they were monsters. Their egos couldn't handle that. So they rewrote reality. They normalized the cruelty until it looked like parenting. They didn't see a starving child. They saw a project learning independence. And because they believed their own lie, they felt zero guilt as they boarded a plane to paradise. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the vase of fake flowers against the wall. Panic is a luxury for children who have someone coming to save them. I had no one. I had to be exactly what they feared. I was observant. I walked to the hallway where the central control iPad for the smart home system was mounted. My stepfather, Paul, loved his gadgets. He had installed Nest cameras in every main room, the kitchen, the living room, the foyer. He used them to check on the cleaning staff, or to yell at me through the speaker if I put a coaster down wrong. I tapped the screen. I knew the passcode because I had watched him type it in 1,000 times. I went into the settings menu for the interior cameras. I found the toggle switch labeled Status Light. This was the little green light that showed when the camera was watching. I swiped the toggle to Off. Then I checked the storage settings. I set it to save all footage to the cloud for 60 days. I looked up at the camera lens in the corner of the kitchen ceiling. It stared back, dark and unblinking, looking dead to the world. But it wasn't dead. It was watching. Day 1. I whispered to the invisible lens. Inventory. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the evidence. The question everyone asks, the question you're probably screaming at your screen right now is, why? Why would a mother leave her 12-year-old daughter to rot in a heat wave? Was she crazy? Was she on drugs? No. Angela wasn't crazy. She was an accountant of the soul. And I was a liability on her balance sheet. To understand the cruelty, you have to understand the house. That 6,000 square foot Texas estate with the marble floors and the infinity pool wasn't hers. It never was. It belonged to my father. He was a roughneck turned oil tycoon who spent his life on rigs and his money on property. He died in an industrial accident when I was 4. He left me everything. But he knew Angela. He knew she loved the lifestyle more than the life he lived to provide it. So, he set up a trust, a steel trap, ironclad legal fortress. The terms were simple and lethal to her ego. Angela was named the trustee. But she was granted something called a right of occupancy. It meant she could live in the mansion, drive the cars, and spend the stipend only as long as she was the primary, full-time caregiver of the beneficiary. Me. I wasn't her daughter. I was her lease agreement. For 8 years. She looked at me across the dinner table and didn't see a child. She saw the landlord she couldn't evict. Every time she bought me clothes. It wasn't affection. It was maintenance costs. Every time she drove me to school, she was paying rent. She hated me for it. She hated that her entire identity as the lady of the manor depended on the breath in my lungs. Paul, my stepfather, was just a barnacle on the ship. He married her for the money, not realizing the money had a heartbeat and a curfew. He resented me because I was the constant reminder that he wasn't the king of the castle. He was just a guest of the 12-year-old girl eating cereal in the corner. That's why the independence narrative was so important to them. They had to convince themselves that I didn't need them. If I was mature, if I was self-sufficient, then they weren't neglecting their duties. They were just stepping back. They could go on their exclusive lovers' cruise to the Maldives, drink their champagne, and pretend for 45 glorious days that the house was theirs, that I didn't exist. They wanted the asset without the obligation. They wanted to strip mine the luxury of my inheritance while leaving the actual owner to rust in the dark. But they forgot one thing about contracts. If you violate the terms, the deal is void, and they were about to violate the most important clause of all. Day 14 was when the world tilted. Texas summers are cruel, but this was biblical. The thermometer on the patio read 108 degrees. The air was so thick with heat you could almost chew it. Inside, the smart thermostat was struggling, the number creeping up from 72 to 75, then 78. And then, at 2 in the afternoon, the hum stopped. The silence was absolute. No refrigerator buzz. No A.C. whir. Just the sudden, suffocating stillness of a tomb. I checked my phone. ERCOT alert, grid instability. rotating outages. But this wasn't rotating. The power didn't come back on in an hour. Or two. The sun beat down on the black roof tiles, turning the attic into a furnace that radiated heat downward into the living space. By sunset, it was 85 degrees inside. By midnight, it was 90. I remembered Paul bragging about the backup generator. Top of the line. He'd told his golf buddies. Could power a small hospital. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went out to the side yard where the massive Generac unit sat. It was silent. I opened the panel. A red light was blinking. Maintenance required. Service overdue. He hadn't serviced it. He'd bought the status symbol but skipped the upkeep, because why pay a guy $200 to look at a machine that never runs? That night, I slept on the marble floor of the foyer because it was the only surface that held a ghost of coolness. I woke up soaked in sweat, my mouth dry as sandpaper. I went to the fridge. The light didn't come on. The milk was warm. The deli meat I'd carefully rationed smelled sour. The $50 I'd spent was rotting in front of me. Panic. Sharp and primal. Clawed at my throat. I grabbed my phone. My battery was at 18%. I had to make it count. I opened Instagram. There was a new post from Angela. A photo of her legs stretched out on a white lounge chair. A turquoise ocean in the background. A mimosa in hand. The caption read, "So blessed to be unplugged in paradise. No news. No stress. Just us. Number self-care. Number Maldives. Number love my life." I stared at the screen. Sweat dripping into my eyes. She was drinking champagne while I was rationing warm water. I opened my messages and typed. My fingers slipping on the screen. "Mom. Power is out. Generator won't start. It's 95 degrees inside. Food is spoiling. I'm scared." I watched the 3 dots appear. She was typing. Hope surged. Maybe she would call someone. Maybe she would tell me where a hidden key was. Or send a neighbor. Her reply popped up. "Stop being dramatic. Abigail. It's just a blackout. It happens. Use the pool if you're hot. Don't ruin my trip with your whining. We paid a fortune for this." Then, a second message. "And don't touch the thermostat settings. You'll break it when the power comes back." I dropped the phone. It clattered against the marble. She didn't care. It wasn't that she didn't understand. She simply refused to let my reality intrude on her fantasy. I wasn't a child in danger. I was a notification she wanted to swipe away. I walked to the pantry and rattled the padlock. It held fast. I kicked the door, screaming until my throat was raw. But the sound just bounced off the high ceilings and died. The heat was a physical weight now, pressing down on my chest. I slumped against the pantry door, sliding down to the floor. The air was heavy, still, and silent. And in that silence, my love for them finally died. It didn't go out with a bang. It just evaporated like water on the hot pavement, leaving nothing behind but a dry, hard resolve. Day 20. I woke up on the marble foyer floor. But I didn't get up. I couldn't. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. Like a dry sponge that had soaked up all the moisture in my body. The air in the house was stagnant, thick, and smelled faintly of the rotting garbage in the kitchen that I didn't have the strength to take out. I crawled to the window. Outside, the world was blindingly bright. The heat shimmered off the driveway in waves. And then I saw it. A silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway next door. It was Mrs. Natalie. Mrs. Natalie wasn't the kind of neighbor who baked cookies. She was a retired corporate litigator, with silver hair, cut in a sharp bob and eyes that could peel paint. My mother was terrified of her. Angela called her that nosy witch. Which usually meant Mrs. Natalie had caught her in a lie. I reached for the front door handle. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. And then I stopped. This is the moment that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. You're probably thinking, "Just open the door, run." But I froze. I was starving. I was dying of thirst. And yet, I couldn't turn the lock. It was the invisible chain. For 12 years, my parents had installed a psychological firewall in my brain. What happens in this house stays in this house. To ask for help was to admit failure. To let an outsider see our mess was the ultimate sin. I had been trained like a dog to guard their reputation with my life. That chain was wrapped around my throat, choking me harder than the heat. I heard Angela's voice in my head. Clear as a bell. Don't you dare embarrass me. Abigail. Don't you dare be a burden. I looked at my reflection in the hall mirror. My eyes were sunken. My skin was gray. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. I realized then that if I didn't open that door, I was going to die in this hallway. And if I died, Angela would just cry pretty tears at my funeral and turn my death into content for her social media. She would win. The anger sparked in my chest. A tiny, hot flame. I wasn't going to let her win. I grabbed the deadbolt with both hands. I twisted. The click sounded like a gunshot. I pushed the heavy door open. The outside heat hit me like a physical blow. A wall of suffocating pressure. I stumbled out onto the porch. The stone burned my bare feet. But I didn't stop. I walked across the scorching lawn. My vision tunneling. Black spots dancing in front of my eyes. Mrs. Natalie was unloading groceries. She turned when she heard me. She dropped a gallon of milk. It burst on the driveway. White liquid splashing everywhere. Abigail. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. I collapsed on her front steps. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She moved with the terrifying speed of a woman who solved disasters for a living. She was at my side in seconds. Her hands cool on my burning skin. She yelled into the house for her maid to bring water and ice. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling 911, she said. Her voice shaking with a rage I had never heard before. No, I rasped, grabbing her wrist. Not just the police. Call Mr. Jeffrey, the principal. She really looked at me at my ribs, showing through my shirt. At the fear in my eyes, and nodded. I'm calling everyone, she said calmly. The police. The school. My legal team. She helped me drink water, then leaned in. Her voice low and steady. You did the right thing. Abigail. You broke the lock. Now I'll finish it. I'm not just your neighbor. I was your father's lawyer, and I am the executor of his trust. Angela is about to learn, she answers to me. Inside her cool, lavender-scented kitchen, she sat me down and asked what evidence I had. I handed her Angela's iPad. The passcode was my birthday. Mrs. Natalie opened the email app and quickly found dozens of messages sent to a supposed nanny named Sarah. There was no nanny. When she checked the IP addresses, her face hardened. They're the same, she said. Your mother created a fake account. She was emailing herself to build a cover story. As she printed the emails, she explained it plainly. Angela had fabricated a digital paper trail, fake updates, fake payments, so if I died, she could blame a non-existent nanny. This wasn't neglect. It was premeditated. This is fraud, Mrs. Natalie said quietly, and criminal intent. When the police arrived, she stood like someone ready for war. 45 days after Angela and Paul left for their vacation, they returned laughing, sunburned, carefree. They walked into the house expecting a child alone. Instead, they found the sheriff, CPS, and Mrs. Natalie. Angela demanded to know where Sarah was. Mrs. Natalie answered calmly, Sarah doesn't exist. The sheriff presented the evidence. The emails. The IP addresses. The fake account created on Angela's laptop. The lies collapsed instantly. Angela tried to blame me. I told the truth, the heat. The power outage. The hunger. The texts she ignored. Then Mrs. Natalie opened the legal file. You were allowed to live here only as Abigail's caregiver, she said. By abandoning her and committing fraud, you violated the trust. Your right to this house is revoked. The house belongs to Abigail, and you are trespassing. The cuffs went on. Angela didn't look at me, only at the house she was losing. 6 months later, the house is mine. It no longer feels like a museum. The walls are painted. The fridge is full. The generator works. Mrs. Natalie is my guardian. Close enough to protect me. Far enough to let me breathe. Angela and Paul were sentenced to 5 years. I finally understand the truth. She never did. Power doesn't come from owning things. It comes from responsibility. She failed her duty and lost everything. Now the house is quiet. Not empty. Peaceful. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm home.